Okay, so we are beginning chapter 9. Chapter 9 is a continuation of the same theme of chapter 8, where chapter 8, we got into a really interesting discussion in chapter 8, but the discussion that we got into about chapter 8 is not actually the main theme of chapter 8. The main theme of chapter 8, using the concepts of the distance between wisdom, chachma, and action. And we got into that whole topic of discussion, how wisdom creates the emotions, which create thoughts, speech, and action, and we can actually affect the sequence of events if it's coming from a godly place. The previous chapter, in essence, described how there are really 5 steps that Chachma is the highest, wisdom is the highest, and therefore insignificant compared to action, which is the lowest. In other words, action, if you compare action to Chachma, because there are so many steps in the middle, they are really very insignificant to one another. And we're going to explain that a little bit more today. In other words, the order of events is Chachma, Midais, so wisdom, Chachma begets emotions. Those emotions beget or express themselves through thought, which then results in speech, which then results in action. So action is rather far away from wisdom. But relative to Hashem, this is in a person. The Alter Rebbe explained that this is how it goes in a person. But relative to Hashem, Chachma, which is actually the origin of creation, is as distant to Hashem as action is. So again, action is removed from wisdom, very, very far apart. But in relation to Hashem, Chachma, even though Chachma is very close to Hashem, we say it's the origin of creation, but in relation to Hashem, it's actually very far from him, and we're going to explain that further. So when we talk about the creation of the world, which is really the theme of Shaar, Hayichud, Ve'amunah, we say, Kulam b'chachma asisa. You made everything with wisdom. Now look at these 2 words. Asisa, you made, so that's referring to action. Hashem created. He did something, he created. How did he create? From Chachma. So everything begins from the level of Chachma. Now the value of an act compared to the energy of Chachma, which is the source of all life, is insignificant. We're not saying it's not important, but there's a very big distance between the two. But compared to Hashem, even Chachma, which is the beginning of creation, is also very insignificant. Now, Chachma is 5 levels removed from action, but Hashem is removed infinitely from Chachma, and that is why the distance is even greater. Or we can't even measure. It's just completely insignificant. Now, to understand why there is such distance between the 5 steps within a person, right? They're actually, when we go from Chachma to action, when we go from our wisdom to emotions, to thought, speech, and action, they are truly opposite tendencies. So, for example, the wisdom that a person has, wisdom, right, is internal. It takes a person into himself. Whereas emotions takes a person out of himself, especially when he starts expressing those emotions. Then thought is internal. Speech is external. And action is even further away from the human being because it deals with objects. So we're talking, the reason why they are so far removed from one another is because they're on complete opposite ends of the internal and external spectrum. And that's just to understand how much space there is between Chachma and action. It's internal, and the other one is exponentially external, further out, using materials of this world. not even sometimes to do with the actual person. But then why, here's the question, why do we use this example? Because the Alter Rebbe actually uses this as a mushal to explain how Chachma, the beginning of all creation, is truly insignificant and very far from Hashem. And it seems like he's saying, just as action is very far removed from the Chachma of a person. But relative to Hashem, Chachma is the same as action, no difference, all insignificant. So why we use this example is very simple, because human beings can only understand and comprehend the chain of existence from Chachma. We cannot understand what happens above Chachma. Chachma is the highest created existence. And we can only understand and comprehend the chain of existence from Chachma to Asiya, which is the lowest created existence. Because remember that our world is called the world of Asiya as well. In actual fact, we cannot even apply the definition of Chachma, wisdom, to Hashem in any way. For example, saying that, oh, Hashem is higher than intelligence. Like we say that, but it's actually, the Alter Rebbe says, it's not really possible to explain Hashem in those terms. Or we can't even we can't say, oh, we can't understand Hashem. Yes, well, obviously we can't, but doesn't make sense really to say it, because wisdom, when we talk about wisdom, comprehension, understanding, wisdom is something measurable, like all creation is measurable. And Hashem has no connection whatsoever to measurement. And therefore, intelligence, because intelligence is something measurable. Nowadays, we can measure our intelligence with IQ numbers and all sorts of different ways, right? But that doesn't apply to Hashem. Hashem is beyond measure. And yet, sometimes we describe Hashem as wise. We describe Hashem with the 13 attributes of mercy, Chanun, Rachum, etc. We do assign labels to Hashem. We do say Hashem is this and Hashem is that. But why do we say that? Because Hashem is the source of all these things, not that it defines Hashem. So when we say that Hashem is Chanun, V'Rachum, and Chesed, and Chacham, and all these things, B'Chachma Asisa, that Hashem created the world with wisdom, we're not saying that that is Hashem. We're saying Hashem, that is the source of these attributes, these characteristics in this world. Now, it is seemingly a contradiction when we say that Hashem is above his attributes, and also we say that Hashem is one with his attributes. We've been saying that for a while, right? And the Alter Rebbe stops here and he says, only the very learned can understand this concept. Just like, in the Beis Hamikdash, the measurements of the Aron did not fit according to nature in the Holy of Holies, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Here is another example which we simply cannot understand, and we just attach pure faith to it, that Hashem is one with his attributes, but yet he is above his attributes. He cannot even be measured or defined in any way through his attributes. Now, in this chapter, sometimes the Alter Rebbe, in the middle of a chapter of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe will put like a note in parentheses, just to give an added dimension or an added understanding about the concept. And here the Alter Rebbe stops and reminds us that the purpose of Tzimtzum, right? What is Tzimtzum? Let's remind ourselves, Tzimtzum is the concealment of Hashem's infinite light in this world. Not that Hashem is less in this world, but Hashem is everything. His infinite light is here, but concealed through the process of Tzimtzum. Otherwise, we simply would cease to exist. And because of Tzimtzum, we perceive ourselves as existing and independent, and sometimes separate from Hashem. And sometimes we say, where is Hashem? We can't find him. This is all because of Tzimtzum. But the process of Tzimtzum, the way it happens, is to get a neutral, unrestrained light of Hashem to take on the various properties of the 10 spheres. In other words, this neutral, unrestrained, equal light of Hashem then becomes clothed within the spheres. And we call the spheres the recipients, the vessels, the kalim of this light of Hashem. It's similar to what we said before, that Hashem doesn't surround the world. When we say that Hashem surrounds the world, it doesn't mean that he's far removed from the world. He's actually within the world, but this level of surrounding is equal and unrestrained. But through the process of tzimtzum, this light becomes defined through different ways and means and properties of the attributes. And since the attributes, the spheres, are the vessels for the Hashem's light, right? We can apply what the Rambam says about Hashem, what we mentioned in the previous chapters, that Hashem knows everything. Hu hayodea, hu hamada, hu hayadua. In other words, Hashem knows, he is the knowledge, and he is known. In other words, not like a human being that we acquire knowledge. The knowledge is separate from us. It becomes something added to us. We actually change as a result of acquiring new knowledge. Hashem is the knowledge. Hashem is the origin of the knowledge. Hashem is whatever knowledge it is, but we can only say that Hashem knows himself after the process of tzimtzum has begun. Because again, wisdom and knowledge is something measurable. And therefore, when we talk about Hashem in relation to this world, and we say that this world is insignificant to Hashem, we are talking about how Hashem is before the level of tzimtzum. And also, I'd like to remind everybody that it wasn't that the creation of the world happened and then the tzimtzum happened and then there was Hashem unlimited and then there was Hashem in tzimtzum. It happens constantly. Hashem is constantly creating, as we learned in the very first chapter of Shaar, Hayichud v'Amunah. And therefore, this whole process of the light of Hashem coming down and the process of tzimtzum and being concealed and being in the vessels of the 10 attributes, this is happening the whole time at the same time, always. But because tzimtzum creates a definition and a form, we cannot say that Hashem is knowledge before tzimtzum, because knowledge is something tangible, measurable. Hashem is in this knowledge, the knowledge, chachma, bina, das, is all insignificant in relation to Hashem, because Hashem is infinitely separate from them, not only like the distance of the 5 steps within a human being. And then, interestingly enough, the Alter Rebbe says something a phrase that if you're not concentrating, you could just kind of skip over. And I think it's very, very important. The Alter Rebbe says something in this chapter. He says a phrase, Ein lonu esek b'nistoris. We don't have any business with hidden things. In other words, we should not worry ourselves about things that are hidden. You know, it's very interesting. In the many classes that I give on Tanya, a lot of people come and ask me about souls and reincarnation and the angels and the higher worlds. And that is all spoken about in Kabbalah. Now, interestingly enough, many people make a mistake and say that Hasidus is like an offshoot of Kabbalah, or it explains Kabbalah. Actually, Kabbalah is one part of the hidden Torah, and Hasidus is another part. And Hasidus sometimes quotes Kabbalah, which the Alter Rebbe does even in this chapter. But Kabbalah refers to the higher worlds, whereas Hasidus teaches us how to live in this world. So that's why the Alter Rebbe says in this chapter of Tanya, Ein lonu esek b'nistoris. We can get distracted by what goes on in the higher worlds. We can start wondering, wow, it's so amazing, it's so interesting, and we can't begin to understand what goes on in the higher worlds, which is already a creation, and beyond Hashem, which is above creation and before creation and has no definition whatsoever. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe says, no, our business is to have faith. Hashem's, we believe with perfect faith that Hashem and his attributes are one. And therefore, there is nothing besides Hashem. Hashem's attributes, not only his attributes, his will, his wisdom, his bina, das, are all one with him, who is also very removed from them. So he's one with attributes and removed from the attributes, one with the world and removed from the world, all at the same time. And the Alter Rebbe calls this an expression in Aramaic, Raza de Mehem Nusa, the secret of faith. So in the beginning of Shaar Hayichud V'Emunah, the Alter Rebbe had set out the plan that we were going to learn everything that there is to learn according to logic that we can understand, and the rest is faith. So here is an example of what the Alter Rebbe says to us. You don't understand Hashem, you're not meant to understand Hashem. It's faith. We can understand certain aspects of creation because we learn about them, but we cannot define Hashem in any way. And therefore, this world is insignificant to Hashem. Now, we want to make a distinction over here, and this distinction is very subtle and very interesting. So the world is nothing or insignificant in relation to Hashem, right? When we speak about the attributes, we actually don't say that the attributes are insignificant in relation to Hashem, but what we do say is that the attributes are one with Hashem. Therefore, they are not insignificant, they are important, and they are one with Hashem, yet Hashem cannot be defined within them. But here's something very interesting and practical to take away from this chapter, because some of these chapters we can think, what's so practical about it, in our day-to-day lives. So the practical part for this chapter is that when we do a mitzvah, it unites us with Hashem. We become one with Hashem. So it's not insignificant, right? So, we can mistakenly say, oh, the world is insignificant, so anything we do is insignificant. The world is secondary. The world is insignificant in the very same way as certain actions we take in order to do a mitzvah that are secondary and maybe insignificant. So, for example, the food that you eat, you walk to shul, let's say, to daven or to do a mitzvah. You buy parchment to write the tefillin that you will be then putting on, right? The actions before doing the mitzvah are secondary and maybe insignificant, but very much needed. And then when we actually do the mitzvah, then we become one with Hashem. We unite with Hashem on such a high level that the level is even higher than our own neshama, which comes from Hashem. Because our neshama is also a creation. Hashem blew our neshama into us from a very deep place, true. And it's a chelek elokah, we say it's a part of Hashem. But when we do a mitzvah, we are actually able to elevate our neshama to a place that is higher than itself as well. And therefore, when we talk about the spheres, which is the topic of this chapter, we don't say that they are insignificant. We say that they are one with Hashem. And at the same time, Hashem is above them as well. And that the only way really to accept this is with faith and not to try and understand it. Any questions? Sina, you're nodding, but you're muted.
Because I had to finish what you said before I could go back to the question. Okay. Very good. Thank you. I like the end.
Okay.
I like the summary. The summary is the best part. But in the beginning, you said the main theme, I think I got this wrong because I was still not here. Using the concepts of the distance between wisdom, did you say then knowledge or emotion, speech, and actions? What was the second one? Wisdom,
emotions, thought, speech, and action.
Thought,
like in a person, although wisdom is divided into 3 categories, in a person we're taking all 3 categories and lumping them as one, as wisdom. So that wisdom, the chachma, bina, and das, then produces an emotion.
Okay.
Right? That emotion then produces or expresses itself through thought, speech, and action. right?
Okay.
And hopefully in a godly way, right? So the Alter Rebbe uses the example of the distance between the wisdom and the action to say that Hashem, in a person, wisdom is very lofty. It's like the starting point of creation, and action is very far removed. So in Hashem, wisdom is the same thing as action. It's all insignificant to him in relation to him. But the distinction that the Alter Rebbe makes in this chapter is that it's not in the same way as a human being, because Hashem is infinitely greater and higher, and we can't even imagine. We can't even attach the quantities of great and high and beyond measure, because those don't even apply to Hashem. It's like something unapplicable. Hard to understand, but yet the Alter Rebbe says it's faith.
Okay, well, one more thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Towards the end, when you started to give us the example how the world is secondary and insignificant to the actions that we have to take in order to do the mitzvah, right? Like you said, we walk to the shul, then we daven, we buy the parchment to make the tefillin, right? So is that correct when I was saying we become one with Hashem and the world is secondary and insignificant as certain actions we take to get there? What's the end of that sentence?
So actually, okay, so I don't want everyone to become confused over here, because really and truly there are three categories of revelation, put it that way, of on Hashem, with Hashem, and those three categories, the middle category could be changed. So to explain that a little bit more, if you sin, if you don't use the materials in this world correctly, for example, you use your animal soul to govern your life. In other words, you're living life by default and not really with intention, and not a holy life, right? Then that is in the realm of concealment of God. That conceals Kedusha and is called Klippa. On the other side of the spectrum, when we do mitzvahs and we learn Torah, then we are uniting with Hashem, we are revealing Him in essence, and we reveal holiness. Kedusha is holiness, right? In this world. And then there are the neutral things, which is what I was alluding to when we say that when you buy the parchment, when you cook the food to eat, when you walk to shul, you're doing an action. Those actions are truly neutral and are insignificant, not that they're less important, but insignificant in relation to the act of the mitzvah. So finally, when you come to the mitzvah, but those preliminary actions could actually be holy if we have the right intention. So there are people, for example, it's not the custom of Chabad, although I have seen people doing it, but for example, there are people who will buy food for Shabbos, let's say, and every item of food that they buy and that they put in their cart, they'll say, L'kovit Shabbos Kodesh, right? This is for Shabbos, because the intention is to bring holiness, right? If you eat in order to have kosher food and energy to do the mitzvahs, and you are intentional about it, you don't eat gluttonously, and you eat healthy food, and you want energy to be able to help people and do more mitzvahs, then if you have that intention, that food actually becomes holy. But that there has to be an intention attached to that. Whereas an actual mitzvah unites you with Hashem whether or not you have an intention. So when we say that the world is secondary, the world and is a vehicle to us doing our mitzvahs. We can use the world for our means to do mitzvahs, but the world can be important, but it's usually secondary. We can elevate the world by having the correct intention, but it's still secondary to the mitzvah. Does that make sense?
Right. You can have all the intentions in the world, but if you don't do the mitzvah, you didn't do
Exactly. On the other hand, if you do the mitzvah and you have the right intentions, well, then everything gets elevated, right? But the reason why I brought in this example is because when we talk about the world in relation to Hashem, we say the world is insignificant in relation to Hashem. The world is nothing. Ein oid milvado, right? That is yichud ilah. From Hashem's perspective, we are nothing. We don't exist. right? We're insignificant. But mitzvahs are not insignificant. They are one with Hashem, like the spheres are one with Hashem. It's just a little subtlety in the way we describe what's going on, in the language used. We don't say about the spheres that they're insignificant. We do say about the world that it's insignificant. We say about the spheres that Hashem and his spheres are one. The Alter Rebbe says we can't understand that. But then we have to also remember what else is one with Hashem. Yes, the world is insignificant. Yes, we are insignificant. Yes, all the things we do are insignificant. But when we do a mitzvah, that gives us an express flight to connect with Hashem as one.
So when you said three categories of what? What do I say? When I want to read.
There's three. Well, this is going really back to the very beginning of Tanya, where there are three ways in which Hashem's light is either expressed or concealed. So
Okay.
when Hashem's revealed or concealed. So when Hashem's light is completely revealed in this world, that's Kedusha. When it's completely concealed, that's Klippa. When it's like translucid, like those windows that are kind of, you can see the light through, but you can't really see the forms, like there's something there, that has the ability to either be brought into concealment by you sinning or not having the right intentions, or to be elevated into a state where we actually open the curtain and reveal Hashem. It's like malleable. There are certain things that are Kedusha, certain things that are not Kedusha. Can't be changed. But neutral activities, for example, eating, sleeping, working, etc., shopping, etc., depending on the intention, they can be uplifted or downgraded. Chaisara, you were going to say something? I think you unmuted yourself.
I was gonna just a little clarification on that. You said that if you have the intention while you're doing certain things, then they're up, like to do a mitzvah. If you have the intention of going to the store and buying flour to make challah, to take challah, then okay. Let's say you go to the store and you buy all this beautiful stuff and you come home and someone asks you to make a meal for them. Okay, so the mitzvah is making the meal for a sick person, let's say, but all the stuff you did to lead up to that, because you did not have the intention of making the meal, is not part of attachment.
No, so the intention actually is not connected to what you're going to do. When Tanya speaks about intention, Tanya really refers to love and fear of Hashem, right? So when we talk about intention, we're talking about the intention. It's a very simple intention to serve Hashem. So it doesn't matter if you're going to be using that flour to make challah or to make a meal for somebody, right? When you go shopping, you can have the intention to buy ingredients in order to serve Hashem. Not just because you're being extravagant and you just want to show off and you want to, that's the other end of the spectrum, right? So when you buy your ingredients or you even prepare a meal and you say, I am eating this healthy meal with the intention to serve Hashem, I am cooking a meal for somebody because it's a mitzvah and I want to serve Hashem. I am going shopping to fill my house with healthy ingredients and to make beautiful food for Shabbos because I love Hashem and I want to serve him. Then that elevates everything. And it's so simple. It's a very simple thing. You could just have an intention in the beginning of your day that all your actions that you're going to be taking today are to serve Hashem, whether it's going to work or cooking a meal or doing laundry or whatever it is.
Right. So even if you do not have the intention of serving Hashem by making challah and taking challah, it's just something you do by rote, it's still a mitzvah and it still attaches you.
Yes, it's still a mitzvah,
without the intention.
but but the intention behind it are called the wings of the mitzvah.
Okay, fine.
So they're the love and fear of God that takes your mitzvah to the higher worlds. It's not actually a problem if you don't have intention, because if you've done the mitzvah and you didn't have intention, the next time you do a mitzvah and you have intention, it's the other mitzvahs that you didn't, that are similar and didn't have intention, take a ride and attach themselves to that intention and get elevated as well. That's what
I
Tanya tells
remember
us,
when you taught that.
which is very
Yeah.
amazing, right? For example, if you daven and you don't, it's pretty easy to not have intention while you're davening, right? Which is why the Alter Rebbe also suggests pick one prayer each day to have more intention, right? And then the next day you do have kavanah and you do have intention. Well, then the other times you've davened actually piggyback on the times that you did have that you have intention. It's really beautiful. And it's a difference, just one second. It's the difference between living your life by default or living an intentional life. We all go through our days and have mundane activities. And sometimes those mundane activities get on our nerves, like we're not really interested in doing them. We can change our whole perspective because the Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash, they also did mundane activities. They washed dishes, they cooked, they cleaned, they swept. And I'm not saying that everyone has to cook, clean, sweep, whatever, get help, do whatever you want. But even our mundane activities like shopping and working and anything, we can just sit with ourselves in the beginning of the day and say, my intention today is to serve Hashem. I'm going to get to know me in a minute, but I don't know if any of you saw, to me, it was just beyond inspiring. There was, one of the, unfortunately, the people killed on October 7th, there was a video of him singing, the song Elokai Neshama, like about his soul right before. And that is the meaning of the prayer Elokai Neshama. And then his brothers put together a recording. It is beyond, for me anyways, it was very inspiring. If you listen to that and you realize, what are we here for? We're here to serve Hashem. Hashem, the neshama you gave me is because I'm here to serve you. And you could start your day off with such intention. It's amazing. And that can take you through the whole day. Okay, Nomi, you wanted to say something.
I was just thinking about what you were saying, that things that are hidden are not for us to understand, that we shouldn't try to understand what's hidden.
Wasn't me that said it, Alter Rebbe.
I was trying to put that together with the times nowadays and the idea that we also worried for Israel, but they're just things that we cannot worry about because they're not for us to understand. The Abishta could last minute change things for the good and this and that. The only thing we could do is the mitzvahs in intention for Israel, etc., etc. But the idea that you said that it is not for us to worry about things that are hidden, and bringing it together with us all being so worried about Israel now.
This is absolutely a test of our faith and not getting involved in things that we shouldn't get involved in, because honestly, none of us are telling the planes where to go or the soldiers where to fight, and you're like 3,000% correct, because imagine the people coming out of Mitzrayim and standing by the Yam Suf. They could have thought, oh my goodness, what's going to be now? We're going to drown. And in a matter of seconds, Hashem made the greatest miracle in history, which was the splitting of the sea. The whole story of Purim. The whole story of Purim did not seem to follow a natural event. And people could have gotten very, scared. And yet we don't have to go into our history we have so much in our history that just gives us proof and says Hashem takes care of us, right? So yeah, that's at the same time, I think, Sina, I don't know if you heard what I said in the very, very beginning before we even started recording. Bitachon doesn't mean negating our negative feelings. It means validating them and changing them. Because if you just negate and negate and negate and suppress and suppress and suppress, you've got to exchange them with positive thoughts and feelings. But there is a moment of saying, yes, this is difficult. This is really difficult. Have compassion for yourself, because what happens is we judge ourselves for thinking negatively. Oh my goodness, I should be having so much bitachon now, look what's going on. I should just trust in Hashem. And we should. But we also can recognize that it's really challenging and it's a really difficult time in history. And like Nomi said, we can only do what is in our control. Say Tehillim, do mitzvahs for Eretz Yisrael, etc. Daven to Hashem.
I think almost our worrying is almost like a way of us limiting the Abishter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, would we want to have a God that we understand? We wouldn't. That really limits the world. Okay. So I'm going to stop the recording.